Okay, looks like we're ready to go. So this session is by Eamon on some SSO things he's been working on related to Moqui to add, well, very missing support needed for some of those things. So take it away, Eamon.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so this is the second time we view the Moqui SSO. I did present the initial developments in one of the biweekly meetings. So we designed this application probably like 6 months ago. And when I say designed, it was a casual discussion where David was in an ARC call with me, and I'm not sure if Guru was there. And we basically went through the how we would like to build SSO in Moqui in a way that is non-intrusive to the current way the login screen is designed. So with that, let's kick off and take a look. So we'll be presenting how we extended Moqui with SSO capabilities. And all the developments you're going to see today are based on Pack4j. So the Pack4j library is used under the hood. Again, the quick note from yesterday. So I did mention that the Moqui framework is intentionally built to be equidistant and not specific to one industry. And the intended use of the framework is for an individual or for a business to clone it, to fork and to tailor to tweak their exact requirements. So just a note that I've made a habit of including in my presentations, spreading the message. So some important SSO concepts. When we talk about SSO authentication, there are two distinct flows that take place. There's a direct SSO authentication flow and an indirect flow. The difference between them is that the direct flow does not affect the user interface. So the end user puts in a username and password, they don't see any redirection. And what happens basically is under the hood calls using web services or REST APIs to an IDP server. On the other hand, we have the more common indirect authentication flow where you see a login with Facebook or login with LinkedIn button. And basically, that's an SSO button. When you click that, you get redirected to the IDP server, you perform your authentication, and then you get redirected back to the originating application. This is called indirect authentication. Pack4j supports both of these. However, all the SSO developments we've done are indirect authentication. So Moqui to the IDP server, you perform the authentication there, then you're back to Moqui. So what were our success criteria when we designed this application? We basically wanted to enable multiple, we wanted to be able to support multiple SSO providers in a single Moqui instance. And most importantly, we did not want to touch Moqui whenever we're creating a new user. So because that makes perfect sense. You have an IDP server which is used to manage users. So when you create a user, you should only be creating it in the IDP server. You shouldn't touch Moqui. Once the user is created in the IDP server, they should seamlessly be able to log in to Moqui without any friction. And lastly, we want Moqui to always reflect the most up-to-date user profile and roles. Okay, so the authentication flow that I'm going to show you today is basically the user visits Moqui. The user selects a SSO option. They get redirected to the IDP server they selected. The user authenticates on the IDP server. The user is then redirected back to Moqui. And Moqui internally maps the response fields. And then Moqui syncs the user profile and roles. And then the user is finally logged in. These are the sequence of steps that take place when we're authenticating. So let's see this in action. So I have 3 tabs open here. The first 2 tabs are Moqui tabs, and the third tab is Keycloak, which is one of the identity provider servers that we will use today. I'm going to use the first tab like as an admin login. I'll just remain logged in here, and I'll use the second tab and the third tab for playing around with the different SSO operations. So this is a fresh new installation of Moqui. It's the database is clean. It doesn't have any data with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to import some seed data that initializes SSO. And you can see in the second tab, which is our examples tab, let's say, you have the login tab, the reset password, and the change password. So the typical login screen. I'm going to go to data, and I'm going to import the seed data here. And now if I refresh the login screen, I now see that there's an SSO option available here. And this SSO option will show all the basically SSO providers that you have defined. I'm going to go ahead and select Keycloak. So this basically redirects me to Keycloak. I'll put in my credentials, and I'm redirected back to the application. So let's see what happened behind the scenes. So I'll go to the system, and I'll go to users, and I see there's a test user here. Now I'll select, and this user is a member of all users. So let's start with a few test cases. I'm going to log out from here, and I would like to assign a different user group because I want the user to be able to see like some options, let's say an admin group. So I'll go to Keycloak, I'll select the user, I'll go to role mapping, I'll select the client, and I'll add the admin user group, admin role actually. Then as signing in again, now you see that the user has automatically received membership in the admin group. Let's see what it looks like here. So the admin group has been added. Let's try the next test case, which is we update the user profile in Keycloak. Okay, so you can see the email is tester@alchemy.com. The full name is Speedy Tester. So let's go to the details, and let's say the email is tester2, the first name is tester2, and the last name is tester2. I'll save. Now log out, log back in. Oops, I must have disabled the account by accident. Okay. Okay, so now if we refresh the profile, you see that it has reflected all the changes. Now, if we, what we're seeing here is the user's screen from the system application, but if we go to Marble ERP, if we go to all parties and we just search, we see that the party role, the party is available here. And we actually see the historic data. So you can see how the party evolved over time. So since I updated the email from tester2, from tester to tester2, the previous email was expired. Now, next, we're going to make sure that the sessions are properly synchronized. So I have an active session here in Moqui, and you can see that Keycloak tracks the active session here. So we want to make sure that once I log out, that the session is removed. So there you go. The session is now terminated in Keycloak as well. The next test case we're going to do is we're going to change some role mappings. So let's say I don't want this user to be in the admin group anymore. I just want them to have access to the my account application. So just that. So I'll assign the role, but before I log in, I'm going to go to the configuration screens here. And we will discuss these entities in a minute. We're going to go to the Keycloak and we're going to look at the role mapping. So right now, we're only mapping the admin role coming from Keycloak to the admin user group in Moqui. So there is no mapping for the My Account user group. So I'm just going to create that really quick. So the role name is My Account Users. This is the role name that's coming from Keycloak, and this is the user group we want to map it to in Moqui. Okay, so with that, we're now all set for the test. So let's go ahead and log in. And now we see that the user is a member of only the My Account users. If we go to the back to the systems application and we view the user, we see that the admin user group membership has been expired and that the new membership and the my account users has been created. So the next test case we're going to do is the hands-off user creation. I basically showed you a user that already exists, but let's go ahead and create a new user in Keycloak. I'll just call the user Moqui. Let's say I just created the user. Now I'm just going to set the password here. Okay, so the user is now ready. The final step is just review the permissions. So let's say I want to give this user again, I assign them the admin role here. So the expectation is when I log in with the Moqui user, I'm going to see the admin screen. So let's give that a try. There we go. So completely frictionless. The users are completely managed in the IDP server, and Moqui basically synchronizes the profile every time there is a login operation. A common question that came up when I was presenting this to my team members was, if a user gets disabled in Keycloak, will it automatically get disabled in Moqui? And I said no, because the profile gets synchronized at login only. So they basically said, isn't this a security concern? And I said, why would it be a security concern? Because if the user was to log in into Moqui, the login operation would fail in the IDP server. So while the profile in Moqui is not disabled, you cannot actually use it to log in because it does not have a password associated with it. So let's take a look at what really happens under the hood. So if we go to the entities, and we search for this package here, we see 4 entities. The authentication flow, and this was renamed. The initial name was flow, but thanks to David for the feedback. So authentication flow is the name of the main entity, and then you have a role mapping entity, which maps the roles from the IDP server to Moqui user groups. And then you have specific entities for the different authentication flows. So think of the auth flow entity like the party entity, and then the OAuth and OIDC as like the person and organization entity, where they have like more details specific to that type of party. There is an additional entity that is not included in this package. It's a more general use entity, which is for data mapping, because eventually when we do log in, we receive like a JSON object with a number of fields, and we need to map these fields from IDP field names to Moqui field names. So there's a mapping rule set here that takes place. So putting all this together, I'll just use auto screens to show it. Putting all this together, we get the authentication flow entity, which has the type of authentication flow. Right now, 3 types are supported: OIDC, and OAuth, and SAML. Then we have the mapping rule set, which is used to map the fields. I can show you what this looks like. The description is basically the name of the name that appears on the SSO button here. Then you have an icon name. This is used when you have like a third party, maybe a React or a Vue application, and you want to show some fancy button, some fancy icon next to the button. You could use any icon name from Font Awesome or Google Icons. And then the default user groups, the default user group ID. This is used if the role coming from the IDP server does not match any role in the system. So you automatically place those users in whichever group you put in here. And then we actually specify the data source ID here, which is an interesting thing, because on the party entity, you have a data source field, and it's used to identify where this party was originated from. So in essence, you'll be able to look at the party table or entity and then say, show me the parties that came from GitHub, and you'll be able to filter by that directly. And then you have a sequence number used for ordering the buttons, and an inbound and disabled flag used for, and these are specific to Alchemy, so you don't need to mind them. Now, if we take a look at the specifics of OAuth, in this case, there are no details because this is an OIDC connection. So in the OIDC connection, you get the client ID, the secret, the realm, the base URI, the discovery, basically all the OIDC fields. And then the role mapping contains 3 columns. So you have the role name, which is the name of the role coming from the IDP server, the user group you want to map it to in Moqui, and you can optionally specify a role type. If you specify a role type, it'll add it to the party that's getting created. So you could say like this is an employee, or this is a team member, or something like that. And then finally, there is an entity that may not actually find its way to the open source version. It's just a it's called a off-flow application, because in reality, like if you're using Moqui as an API server, you may have like React or Vue applications on the front end, and you probably don't want to show all the SSO options on all applications. You may want to show like a subset here and another subset there. So this entity is just used for filtering authentication flows for third-party applications. It's not, we didn't use it in for the purposes of today's demo. Finally, we have the mapping rule set, which basically contains all the rules that map the IDP field names to the Moqui field names. So in this case, we're receiving like from Keycloak for fields. There are more fields, but the fields that we're interested in are actually these four. And we map them to like user full name, first name, last name, and email address. So this is used to dynamically configure these. So we're planning to open source this component very, very soon. When we do that, Lawrence had a suggestion in the previous meeting, which was, people could then contribute rule sets that the community could use out of the box. So right now, I have like 2 different rule sets configured, one for GitHub and one for Keycloak, each one with its rules. But the system supports a good number of IDP providers out of the box. So we need like a community effort to map or to create the rule sets. And just to show you what I'm actually talking about, if we go to the yes, and if we go to OIDC here, and you look at so these are a few of the client types. So you have like the Apple profile, Active Directory, Google and Keycloak, and then you have other, and then on the OF type, which GitHub as an example uses these, you have a good bunch of other ones. So you have like Bitbucket, Facebook, LinkedIn, PayPal, Twitter, Yahoo. You even have generic ones. So you have like OAuth version 1 or OAuth version 2 for other options that are not listed here, because there were a few that we omitted that Pack4j uses because they simply do not apply in our case. Yes, we will do that for sure, Guru. Okay, so any questions or use case scenarios that you'd like to see?
I have a very exact scenario. So let's say your account exists, you signed up, and you've logged into Moqui, or you've logged into the front end, which logs into Moqui because the token's been forwarded on. You now go to your subscription page in your front end and say, I'm going to pay you $5 a month to get access to the service that you're interested. Moqui has a subscription handling mechanism. Every month, it charges you $5. Let's call that basic level access. Well, what if there's also a higher level access? You can pay $50. Let's call it medium. 100 is high level access. Moqui does all the credit card processing, does the once a month subscription renewal, and then the credit card fails. So your subscription lapses. How can you push that subscription level access back from Moqui into the single sign-on system, so then all the other things that are connected to the token can see that access permission? Is there a way to do that with your component?
No, there isn't a way to do it in our component, because basically the gap here is the source of truth in the implementation that I showed you today is the IDP server. So the IDP server contains the users and the roles and the user profiles. So in your case, some API call would be needed on the failed credit card transaction back to the IDP server to upgrade or degrade the access rights. This is not part of this implementation.
And from what I've seen, those kinds of calls are not standardized. How you,
Correct.
every single IDP, you have to have their library or know their
Absolutely.
library.
So absolutely.
That is a lot of work.
That is a lot of work for sure. Now the component that I demoed basically has support for OIDC and OAuth, and they have a very specific authentication flow. The callback that you mentioned is not part of these protocols, so unfortunately it'll be per vendor. So it'll have to be developed per vendor.
And on that note, we do have a Moqui key cloak that is tied just to Keycloak and does call outs to push that kind of information back into Keycloak. So it can utilize they can fit together because they don't really clash at all. So
Absolutely.
if you've decided to use Keycloak in your business, both will work.
And
yeah, for sure.
I might be looking at this wrong, but it kind of seems to me like you're overloading the user group concept a little bit there. User groups would be better for controlling access to like artifacts, and maybe you would want to create a role on the party or something like that instead of trying to use a user group to control that access.
Who you're directing that comment to?
To your scenario.
No, we are not using user groups. I never mentioned user groups.
What you're saying is that you want to change their user group based off their subscription.
No, I never said user group. I never said a Moqui entity at all. I said there's a subscription, and that is pluggable to be implemented anyway. I never said how we implemented it. It's actually implemented as a party classification. And our current Moqui key cloak can push a user group, party classification, a party role. It pushes all of those basic date-based filtering things that Moqui has back into Keycloak. So, yeah, I purposefully left that part vague when I was talking just a moment ago.
I posted a couple of links here to this FinOps concept, which I think is really cogent for what we're doing. That your source of truth is ultimately your financial arrangements. You know, that if a user isn't paying for a service, they shouldn't be able to connect to that service.
Right.
And that if we can project finance realities into the identity management system, and then that the like service mesh, operates on the identity management grants, that you can actually be like, oh, you're trying to connect to the video conferencing, but you didn't pay your video conferencing bill. Well, you can't connect to that service. So I think it's great. This is awesome, but I think it potentially is a two-way street, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the problem we wanted to solve, and basically the root source of this development is, in production environments where, particularly in commercial production environments, it's unlikely that Moqui will be the only application running. There are multiple applications running in production, and there is a very strong need for having an identity provider service. And today, most companies use either Active Directory or some other variants in basically the cloud user IAM tools. So the purpose of this development was to synchronize and to facilitate login to Moqui using the cloud IAM tools. The problem that you described is another problem, which is very interesting, which is, okay, the user source of truth is somewhere else, but the facts that affect the users and their profiles are in our system. So how do we synchronize the events that are taking place in Moqui to back to the IDP server? And that's a very interesting problem that we have not encountered in our case, and probably because we don't do like these types of billing operations, but it's a very valid problem for sure. I think, as Adam mentioned, these two could go hand in hand, where this is solving the first bit of the problem of SSO, and then we have the missing part, which is, okay, changes are taking place in Moqui. How do we synchronize them back to the IDP server?
I think this kind of thing could be a good way to attract users too, like that this kind of capability.
One
And
of our clients uses WordPress because it just works, and they are a Microsoft shop, so they've signed on to everything Azure. Well, they've got single sign-on with their Windows desktops and all the other services they have. They wanted it in WordPress, and they didn't want to pay for me to write anything. So, but they're willing to pay $1,000 a year for a WordPress plugin to just do all of basically what your plugin or your component is doing in Moqui. And so this is a very hot topic in commercial environments. To just
absolutely.
Say, okay, there's a GUI. They like the GUIs, no code kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
and particularly, you mentioned WordPress, and that's already one of the out of the box supported options for OAuth here. WordPress.
Oh, well, this would use WordPress as the source of truth, but what we had to do is WordPress was consuming the Azure single sign-on.
Oh, okay, yeah. Cool. Great. I think we've achieved the goal of this presentation, and we've identified some potential topics for improvement for upcoming presentations, which is great. I will drop a message to the Moqui mailing list once this is done. Once this is open source, it's going to be very soon, within the coming few days. I've just been overly busy, very busy this past period, and I didn't get a chance to get this done. And the approach we're going to do, as David mentioned in one of the bi-weekly calls, is we're going to push these changes to the main Moqui branch in the main Moqui repo as a branch. So then the community can review and test and tweak. And then once we feel it's stable enough, then we can merge it into the upstream version.
Cool.
Yeah, that'd be great. As soon as you're ready, let me know, and I'll create a branch for you to put a pull request into.
Sure thing.
How much security testing has been done on this? Have you tried, just like basic stuff, like what would it actually take to log in on admin with this process, the endpoints exposed, that kind of stuff?
I have not spent a lot of time. That would be something that you would really enjoy, Michael, once the PR is in.
I can speak a little on that. This token, which is passed in on the request, and there's a couple different ways, cookie value authorization header, is cryptographically signed. And to verify that, there's a behind-the-scenes secret that gets shared. So then Moqui has that, and it can talk to KeyCloak, and it says, hey, give me the keys used to sign this, and it can validate that the token payload has not been modified. And that's all talked about in detail on many different blog sites or articles about JWT itself.
Is it using JWT for auth?
JWT is the method of encoding of the opaque authorization bearer base64 data.
Got it.
And you can go to jwt.io, paste any opaque token, and it will go and tell you what the pieces are, but it obviously can't validate the signature because it doesn't have the key used to sign it.
Correct. The OIDC and OAuth use JWT. The SAML one uses XML, but that implementation is not complete yet. So all the groundwork is ready. It's just not complete because we couldn't find a SAML provider to test with. So
I only know of the one, Microsoft.
yeah. So we'll see. We requested some SAML credentials from our security team, but they seem to be under a lot of pressure as well. So no promises anytime soon.
We know how that can be. This is so great, though.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope it comes across. We're excited about what you're doing.
Yes, we are. And the first Keycloak Monkey we did is identical to yours in that the token comes in on the request and we go pull all the information out of it, stuff it into Moqui, but it was a single use application.
Yeah.
And so you've taken all the extra effort to make it pluggable and configurable is a huge win.
Yeah, and basically a lot of thanks goes to Gurdaram here because this is actually the second iteration of using Pack4j. The first iteration was a complete takeover of the login screen. So you don't see the Moqui login screen. As soon as you hit the Moqui URL, it automatically takes you to Keycloak. That has some advantages in some cases, but it has some disadvantages if you want to have multiple SSO providers. So we learned a lot of lessons from that integration, and basically they were eye openers that allowed us to get this effort done.
The other disadvantage is if something was messed up, it would be hard to log into Moqui sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
And that for sure. Okay, over to you, David.
Very good. Thank you, Eamon. I'll go ahead and stop the recording now.